Sound design.
And I actually got a lot of flack from some of the guys there, like, oh, why are you working for free? Why are you doing this? This is stupid. Sure. They're just gonna take advantage of you. And I'm like, no, I want to learn how to do this. I want to be out here more. And I'll never forget our truck driver at the time. We had a full-time truck driver, and he's like, you guys are all laughing. He's like, yeah, one day you're all gonna work for him.
Sound design. Sound Design Live is produced independently by me, Nathan Lively, in Minneapolis, Minnesota. Welcome to Sound Design Live, the home of the world's best online training and sound system tuning for live sound engineers, guaranteed to improve your confidence and consistency. I'm Nathan Lively, and today I'm joined by the Director of Audio at IMS Technology Services, Chris Leonard. Chris, thanks for being here.
Thanks for having me.
You're actually in Minneapolis. You're in my office right now.
I'm in your office.
This is the first time I've ever done an interview in my office.
That's logistically got to be a lot easier and less editing.
Yeah, I hope so. I mean, I think it'll just be of higher quality, but our isolation is not so good.
Yeah, well, it's too bad we can't have the windows open. It's beautiful outside right now.
It is a beautiful day. It's I don't know if weather in Philadelphia is like this. You're not from Philadelphia, but that's where you live now.
Yeah, originally from Maryland.
Okay, so you've been in Philadelphia for about 9 years?
Yeah, 8 years, yeah.
Okay, cool. And that's how long you've been in IMS, because you moved there to work there.
That's correct.
And it seems like in the center of the country, because I'm from Texas, and this is how it was in Texas, weather will just change. And so we had a heat wave yesterday and the day before, and it got up to 100 degrees, and now it's a beautiful 72 all day long.
Now, growing up in Maryland, that's what it was like. If you didn't like the weather, just wait 5 minutes, it'll change.
So, Chris, I definitely want to talk to you about your work at IMS, designing sound systems, and work you've done in the past, touring with people like Tears for Fears. So, first of all, what is your favorite Tears for Fears song?
My favorite Tears for Fears song would be Start of a Breakdown.
Scratch the ice, let the telephone ring. Sense of time is a powerful thing.
Knowing them personally, they're some of the most genuine people that I've worked with.
Oh, wow.
Their music is killer. They really deeply care about the sound quality, which is, they started off as studio musicians they spent as much time as they could on their first record in the studio to make it sonically the best they could before they went out on tour and released Who They Were. So their first album is a phenomenal album, whereas some bands, they got to ramp up to what they are. So it was a pleasure to work do monitors and, do stereo ears for guys who cared about panning and tonality and all these things. And so, they would call out frequencies like, let me get less 500 in this guitar, stuff like that specific.
Wow. Because they'd spent so much time in the studio.
Yes.
Let's go back to the beginning. How did you get your first job in audio? And I guess it wasn't even a job, because I know you started out working with your dad. Did he ever pay you?
I mean,
you got paid in experience.
Yeah, it's paid in experience.
He's like, "You want to have some fun, kid?"
No, yeah. So my joke is I tell people that I've been gigging since I could walk.
Okay.
And it's almost true. So my dad got his start in sound when he was in college, working for a cover band. And so since ever I came along, I was putting gear in the back of a station wagon and doing gigs with him almost every weekend.
Did he consider himself, was he an entrepreneur, like an audio engineer?
No, it was just kind of on the side for fun. Okay. I mean, it was never really professionally. He was an insurance agent and web designer and different things through the years. It was never like a full-time, job. He was the sound guy for the church. So, growing up, every weekend, we were at a mobile church, so I had to set up and tear down every week. So even as a kid, literally, I was gigging every weekend.
Wow.
And then we had a local guy who had basically a barn full of gear. It was doing anything from high school musicals to concerts and stuff like that we would go out as a team. And actually then I was doing a lot of lights and video and stuff because my dad was always mixing.
You got what was left.
Yeah, exactly. Mm-hmm. High school was coming to an end, and trying to figure out what I wanted to do for a living. And my dad and I had always joked about, big trucks and going on tour and tour bus and all this stuff. And you always thought it was like a dream thing. I didn't think much of it. And I was like, well, I got to do something.
Is he from a small town?
Yeah, small town, yeah, for sure. And like an hour west of Baltimore. So, close enough, but, far enough out in the county. So I had to make a living. It's like, what am I going to do? And it's like, I really want to do the sound thing. So I found a local school called Sheffield Institute for the Recording Arts, and they have a couple different courses, and it's like a tech school. So it's like a 300-hour program. So I went for a year, 2 nights a week, and went through what's called their AudioWorks program. So it's mostly focused on recording. They have one live sound portion of the class of the school. And so I learned a lot while I was there. I knew a lot going in, which also helped, but it definitely it helped lay a lot of foundation of fundamentals that maybe I wasn't taught. How air, sound travels through the air, and how EQs are made up, and different, more than just, hey, if I turn this knob, things get louder or quieter, or more applicational in theory of why and how things happen. So it helped lay a good foundation on what I already knew. And ultimately, it got me my first gig at Maryland Sound. One of the instructors was a live sound teacher there, and so he was instructed to kind of bring in some greener, newer guys to the company. And so I came in for an interview, and he drops a PM4000 schematic in front of me. And he's like, if I want to route this to this, is it possible? And I had to look at the diagram and schematic and say yes or no. And then okay, well, yes. Well, then how? And I had to show him, because this connects this, so it's like, holy cow.
Talk about Maryland Sound for a second, because I only recently heard about Maryland Sound, and it's a big company. Yeah. They do all the presidential inaugurations. They have these huge custom built towers for putting speakers on, and they do New Year's Eve in New York City. So for people who don't know Maryland Sound, can you talk a little bit about what they do?
Yeah, so Maryland Sound's been around for quite some time. Off the top of my head, I want to say the 60s, somewhere in that range. Back in the 70s, 80s, and even early 90s, they were one of the larger touring houses on the East Coast, not big as Claire and some of the others. And a lot of big tours, everything from, Floyd's Momentary Lapse of Reason tour to Billy Ray Cyrus to Kenny G to just all kinds of different artists have come through
so
there.
They're doing concert sound, they're doing a lot of tours. Is that kind of their bread and butter, or are they also doing a lot of these corporate events, outside events?
Yeah, for the longest time it was their bread and butter, and then there was a shift into the early 2000s of getting into the more industrial stuff. So they were doing Gravity Games, which is kind of like X Games, but it travels, and it eventually became the Do Action Sports Tour. So you got motocross and BMX and skateboarding, and in the wintertime it's snowboarding and stuff like that. So I would do runs with them. It's like 5 cities across the country, and that's where those poles come in place. Or they got into Times Square New Year's Eve. In fact, they were the only sound company to ever do Times Square New Year's Eve, because prior to them, there wasn't sound in the square. And I forget what the year is. For the longest time, the city thought that they would actually create more ruckus, and in fact, they didn't want the crowds to get too rowdy. And it actually had the opposite effect. It actually kept the crowds more calm once they could hear what was going on and be a part of it.
Sure.
So having those outdoor gigs, they had the XFL, if you remember those days, where that was much more of a party atmosphere of the NFL. The WWE, I believe, ran, and so they needed, these poles to put in stadiums and hang line arrays and hang speakers. And then inauguration, where they do audio from all the way from the Capitol building all the way down to the White House. They do.
I should have said presidential inauguration.
Yes,
that makes more sense.
Yeah, so I got to do a lot of those at Times Square New Year's Eve, everything from being the front of house system tech to monitors on one of the stages. The inauguration, I've done the last 4 inaugurations as one of the system techs.
Okay. And that, from my understanding, there must be many system techs, because there are all these, I don't know what to call them, pods, sections of sound. So you were probably responsible for several towers or something, right?
Yeah, on the inauguration, so you have the lead audio engineer, Pat Paulstel, who's a pretty well-known engineer. Yeah, so then there's a front of house system tech, and then he has to live in front of house because there's so much going on. And we have some guys that basically take care of all the speakers that are on the lawn. And out to our delay worlds, because we delay out to the start of the mall, which is pretty far if you actually look at the map. And then I handle everything on the stage side. So there's a couple hundred speakers that are from on the stage side for Foldback. Okay. And so they start loading in on like the 2nd of January. And the show is, I think, the 28th of January. Okay. So you spend about 2 weeks. It's about 2 weeks of loading in and running cable and testing and tuning, and then there's rehearsals and stuff involved. The different years I've had slightly various roles on show days. The 1 year President Obama's first inauguration, I was helping out Yo-Yo Ma and Itzhak Perlman. They were playing up in the top where the choir is, and so I was kind of their handlers and getting their mics in place. And then this past year I was the comms guy on the inside, so I was in command center with generals and all kinds of stuff who were on comm calling the show and making sure I mic'd up the two Chief Justice John Roberts and Justice Clarence Thomas. They do the oath signing in, so we put a lav on them, so I got to mic them up before the show. It's a pretty unique event for sure.
Why wouldn't they use you in the same position both times? It seems like they would think, okay, Chris did this last time, so he knows all about it.
Well, all the wiring and all the speakers from all the Foldback perspective, I did that every time. For the first 3 years, I handled the choir loft, and any bands that were happening up there. And then the guy who used to do the comms no longer worked for them, and so I ended up taking that over this past time.
Okay,
so it was a change in personnel.
So you got the job there by one of your professors recommending you. If I want to get a job at Maryland Sound and I want to work on these kind of events, what should I do?
That's always a tough one. People, how do you get in? And it's there's a couple guys at Maryland Sound who you just call up and you're persistent and say, hey, I want to do this. A lot of it I think has to do with just your attitude, and your work ethic. Nowadays work ethic is a thing that's a thing of the past. It feels like. So I feel I could probably speak better to say maybe where I'm at now at IMS is a lot of times if I have a guy who's maybe newer and greener, because I think it's kind of how you're saying if I'm kind of newer to the industry, not a seasoned person who knows what I'm doing, a lot of times we'll refer them to some of the local labor companies and, hey, work with said local, labor company, who we use all the time for our shows. Okay. And that way you can learn our system, learn our cables, learn signal flow, things like that. And then, I'm more inclined to bring you along because I've seen your work ethic. I can see you. Because as a company, you don't always have the space to bring in a green person right away. Mm-hmm. So you need to have them mature a little bit. But if you can mature them in a labor pool that you work with all the time, they're working with your gear, they get to know your gear, I'm much more likely to bring you in if you already know my stuff, my clients, I've seen your, especially now in corporate world, you can know signal flow and mix your ass off. But if you can't, stand in front of a CEO and put a lav down his shirt and speak to him, that's gonna be hard for you to work for me.
So maybe a good approach would be if I want to work with Maryland Sound, I might reach out to them and say, what labor bookers do you work with? Can you refer me to them? And maybe start out in that path. And then when I get back in touch with Maryland Sound, I can say, hey, I've been working with these guys. We did these shows.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay. No, and networking is key, like anything. I mean, it's all in who you know. So if you know some guys that have worked with you and can refer to you, I mean, if you came to town for the first time and said, hey, I'd like to work for you, the first thing I'd be doing is looking to see who you're connected with on LinkedIn, or else who I know that already knows you, and word of mouth. I'm going to trust if I get two people who have worked with you before that I trust. I'm gonna weigh that heavy into how they feel your work ethic is and your personality and your skills and stuff like that.
So connect Maryland Sound to Tears for Fears.
So I had been, touring for a few years with them. They landed the account, and so I got asked to be the monitor engineer. I did about a year and a half with Josh Garobin, first as a monitor tech and crew chief, and then the last 6 months of that, I was his monitor engineer. The engineer needed a break.
Tears for Fears, where are they from?
They are from Bath.
Okay. And they were going on tour. They were coming to the U.S. and they said, we need to, and I guess their tour manager said, we need to get a production company.
Yeah, and actually the tour manager that they had hired his name's Todd Goldstein, and he is the son of the owner at Maryland Sound. And so so they partnered with Maryland Sound, and so he was tour managing / doing front of house, so that's how the partnership started there.
So I'm assuming Maryland Sound probably started handling their tour for the U.S., but then maybe went global after that.
So we did
because you did international tours with them.
Yeah, correct. Yeah, okay. So we did like a West Coast run of like wineries and House of Blues and type places, amphitheaters, and then we went international overseas. We brought a few pieces of gear with us, but most of it was local. So at that point, Tears for Fears was kind of just contracting me through Maryland Sound.
Okay. And so talk to me about the work. You were mixing in your monitors. What total did you have? What total outputs did you have coming from your board?
Let's see. 1, 2, 3, 4. I had like 5 or 6 guys on stage.
Okay.
And then two techs, a drum tech and a guitar tech.
And
all ears, so no wedges.
Was it super intense? Like, do you have a million cues and you're like adjusting things for every song, or do they kind of, once they get in a good spot, they can kind of just do the whole show?
I did have a different scene for each song. It wasn't too cue intensive, but enough things changed from song to song. Kurt and Roland, the two singers, each of them have their own songs that they lead, and so you have to treat it a little bit differently for that. Kurt will change his bass from song to song, and so I might have some adjustments for that. And then I was making I would do some delay and stuff like that, depending on what the song required. And so I had changes for that as well.
Okay. So you worked with them for 4 years?
I did 2 runs with them. Okay. So it was spread out across about a year and a half. I was supposed to do another U.S. run and then a South America run, and that was right at the point when I was transitioning to leave to move to Philadelphia area.
Okay, so this was, you talked to me about this. This was starting a family, right?
Yeah, so in the midst of touring, I had my first daughter, and so about 2 years into her being around, it was time to make a move to be home more for my family. Mm-hmm. And my wife wanted to get back to the Philly area, where she's from. So I started looking for, a different job up in the Philly area as opposed to where I was at. So I didn't necessarily want to leave touring and Maryland Sound. I was very happy. I was starting to make a name for myself as a monitor engineer, and so it was a tough transition, but it was worth it for the family.
Sure. IMS mostly does corporate events, right?
Correct.
Okay. You had done corporate events before, but now this was going to be your full-time gig, and ending up eventually as director of audio, you are responsible for leading teams, designing systems, meeting with clients. Did you know how to do all that stuff already?
It was definitely a change. When I was looking to move, I wasn't looking for corporate work yet, per se. I was looking at some of the regional sound companies. I still wanted to do sound. It's my passion in life. And a mentor of mine found IMS and was like, "Hey, check these guys out. I'm not sure who they are." And so I did, and they were offering a full-time position, whereas all the other people were only offering freelance, because at the time, it was 2009, 2010. It was an awful time to be looking for a job, and I wasn't going to move on a freelance basis. The type of corporate work was different, but a lot of principles still apply. And since I had mostly done monitor work and system tech work, and a lot of systems had already been designed for me, it was a new ball game for me, being responsible of quoting and speccing a show with production managers and deciding, how many speakers to put on the show and where exactly to put them and how to hang them. That was slightly different than my experience at Maryland Sound. So it was definitely a learning curve. I had never managed actual employees under me. I've managed, stagehands and stuff like that, a cruise.
For days or tours.
Tours, yeah. Sure. So on Groban, I was the lead audio tech, and so I was responsible for the 10+ stagehands we would get every day, and roles and responsibilities. So I had experience managing people, just not in the same way.
We've talked about your experience some, and I'm sure there's some things we skipped over, but I would love to get into talking about some more technical stuff.
Sure.
Let's talk a little bit about why you're here. So you're not just visiting Minneapolis. You're here working on a show that we actually worked on together.
Correct.
Pretty big show. And we already discussed that we can't talk about who the client is, but that's not really even that important because what we're interested in is sort of like the system that was set up. So we were at the Minneapolis Convention Center, which is a huge space. I've never worked there before. There's a big hall downstairs. There's 4 huge connected halls upstairs. And you said you had measured the size of it?
Yeah, well, the size of our general session was seated area was about 350 feet deep by about 250 feet wide as our seated area. The room is bigger than that, so it's about 9,000 people or so is the seated area of the general session that I'm working in.
Okay, you did the design for everything.
Correct.
The audio design. While I was there, I almost never saw you because while you were setting up upstairs for this huge general session, I was downstairs in a smaller room working on some kind of like an introductory event, more of like a cultural event.
Yep.
There was some music and presentations, and it was actually pretty fun. So you and I didn't actually see each other. You and I didn't see each other that much, but we worked together some, and I saw your setup. So let's talk about the bigger event, the general session first. Is there anything that you want to talk about that you thought, this was a big challenge, I don't know how it's going to work, and then getting into the room and putting speakers up, and you were at a rehearsal today and you heard the sound. What comes to mind for you that you want to share about that?
My biggest concern going into it, which is how enormous the space is and not knowing what kind of reflections and reverberant type space it was going to be. There's these giant domes that have a 90-foot peak in the center.
So giant metal domes on top of concrete floors. And
yes, best case scenario if you're doing audio, absolutely.
And they put in carpet, but it's a super thin carpet. So.
Yeah, no, they're putting some carpet in aisles and padded chairs, and then people ultimately. But so that was my biggest concern going into it. And surprisingly, the room is pretty dead. You heard it too. I mean, I expected to be much more reflections in there. There's some weird stuff that happens in the center of the dome that's to be expected. You clap your hands and it flutters like crazy for a couple seconds. When designing the system, I wanted to make sure that I wasn't spraying audio at any places that weren't intentional.
Sure.
Right. I mean, that's kind of what we do to begin with anyway. But so I flew my arrays, higher than I would normally get the chance to, given the ceiling of the height of the ceiling, so that my first row, my bottom box is almost pointing straight down.
Yeah.
So my goal was to get the PA as far away from the stage as possible, but still, be the first row, still being in that main coverage. Also to give me the most, gain before feedback on the podium, and. So I got as wide and far downstage as I could, which led me to having a center hang. So I had a left-right center hang, and then some outfills for some seating that's directly left and right of the stage. And then beyond that, as we kind of discussed on site, I don't like throwing more than 150 feet or so if I can avoid it. So that kind of established where my next delay line was going to be. And then I tried to make sure that my seam between the two would happen in an aisle, so that if I can't get that seam great, then it's landing in an aisle, not where seating is. So I still overlapped them about 20 feet or so you do have a transition. But I really tried to, the difference in doing maybe delay or relay. Right. And so I treated it more as a relay as opposed to delay.
So it sounds like, just reminding everyone kind of your goal here, to only put sound where there's people. So you said, let me do relay speakers and I can use a steeper vertical angle. And so I'm not just playing into the back, I'm not playing into walls, and I can really get more control over it, right?
Absolutely. Yep. No, and it worked out really well. So, I mean, once you're hearing the bottom box of the delay, it's hard to tell that you're actually here in the front. Enough to bring your image forward, but not enough to really, degrade and mess with it. And to do that for one more set of delays as well. And there's bleacher seating in the back. So it worked out surprisingly well. And it made for easy tuning, when tuning time came.
You should explain the difference between delay and relay speakers.
A delay would be, I would take the mains and I would aim, as much of the audience as I could get. And then you're using, delaying your delays, and just to help them along, as opposed to relay being, I'm covering this section with these speakers, the next section with this set of speakers, and so on.
Sure. I think you can think about relay speakers more like a parade route might be a way to think about it. And And I think the key is isolation, right? Like a delay speaker, you're never in complete isolation. You still hear the mains, but a relay speaker, at some point you'll be in isolation and potentially not hear the mains at all.
Yeah, and for your benefit too. It's a lot easier to control. And again, you're not having to have as crazy shading and stuff on your mains that, I'm not trying to throw it to the back of the room, 350 feet away, and then have to shade my bottom box by 10 dB because of that.
Sure. So I had a couple specific question things I saw you doing. You got this Smart on Wheels?
I did.
so talk about that.
Yeah, so, on a gig like this, we have the luxury of having a day or so or about half a day or so to tune. Okay. Whereas, a typical gig, you're lucky if you get 20 minutes. Sure. So with my CL5 packages, my front of house rack has RI8 and RO8 in it and switches.
And those are Dante IO.
Yes.
For the CL5.
Yep. Okay. So we use that as our preamps into Smart. Dante right into Smart. I was using four microphones for an average. And then I put like a 42-inch AV cart right next to it because I had 3 computers. Mm-hmm. I had one running Smart, one for our system processor, and the other for the amps. Okay. And that way, as we rolled along the floor, I could just roll those together where we were, and I had all 3 computers, and I had my I/O, and I had my network as the switches in there, so that's how I can get to my processor and how I can get to the amps.
So you've got Audio Architect to control your
BSS Blue 806. Yeah.
And then what are you using to control the amps?
Performance Manager, because they're Crown iTechs.
Okay, so you got that on wheels, and the reason you've got that on wheels is so that you can actually be in the space that you're tuning, right, and hear the changes.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Especially given the time and given the space, I wanted to just be out where the mics were, and so I'm hearing every little change as opposed to, watching Smart, watching some lines, make some changes, go out, listen to it, come back. I didn't want to be tethered to front of house. I wanted to be able to be out in a room, walk around as you make changes. Hit bypass, unbypass EQs back and forth, so I can hear it right then what the changes are. And I was already walking enough on this gig to go back and forth to front of house for this would have been even more miles.
Could you potentially do that wirelessly with Smart on a remote client? And is there some way to get your other control software, Audio Architect, wireless?
I guess you could, but it's just not necessary given I have my preamps there anyway, and so it would be much easier just to have everything hardwired, not have to worry about any wireless potential lag of issues or anything.
We should take a quick detour here and talk about you're really into education. So you told me you've taken the Smart class 3 or 4 times? 4 times. And you are really active in the Smart users group.
Continuing education is, at least in sound, is I never want to stop learning. I feel like the day you stop learning, you're only moving yourself back. And so I push myself to learn new things. One of the things that you and I talked about earlier was when I was at Maryland Sound, I had all these mentors to work under, and guys that have been doing it for 20 years or more, and so you can pick their brain, right? And then when I left, and I was still pushing myself then to learn things. I remember buying my first computer and, downloading every program for every amplifier and pushing every button in there and just, pulling every piece of gear off the shelf and pushing every button I could and learning things. When I left there and I kind of became, the guy as opposed to having the mentors there, I really had to push myself to learn more, and it was on me now to do the learning. So whether it be, online learning, whether it be classes, doing SynodCon, Smart, going to Infocom, things like that. I have a passion to learn and perfect my craft more and more all the time.
So I think a lot of other people are in that boat. I mean, there are people who are either geographically, financially, time limited that maybe are not going to go to university or otherwise have resources, opportunities to do a thing. So for other people who are learning on their own, do you want to give a couple more recommendations? I mean, obviously you recommend the Rational Acoustics classes for Smart. What else do you want to recommend?
Even not just the classes, their manual is actually a killer resource for sound system design and tuning. Their manual is a lot like their class, in that the first half of the class is just learning about how sound works and how speakers work, and because if you don't understand that, then as quickly the lines on the screens don't mean anything. So that's a good source. I recommend your podcast, of course.
Thanks.
SynodCon is definitely something I recommend. You can do it online and then in person. I definitely recommend that.
You've done both online and in person.
Yep. Yeah, it's been great. There's so many blogs and resources. Front of House Magazine, Pro Sound Web, all of those. Get into all those forums. I mean, there's so many smart people out there that are eager and willing to share their knowledge. Just gotta ask the questions. There's so many user groups on Facebook, like the Smart Group, and many others that I look at it as I enjoy teaching people things and telling people. So people ask me how to do this. I'm not trying to keep trade secrets here or anything like this. We're all in this together to make sound better for everyone. So it's just ask. There's definitely people who are willing to kind of help you along.
Cool. I'm about to take my first Rational Acoustics class this month. We're in July now, so
Nice.
I'm excited about that.
Which instructor?
Jamie.
Nice.
Jamie Anderson. And I have done one of the online Synod classes, and that was good. I want to do some more. And I have not done anything in person with Pat Brown, but one of my students has, and he said it was great. So I would love to do one of those. Okay, cool. Cool. So back to the general session. We talked about Smart on Wheels. Tell me about the Podium Cat Snake. Why do you need that? Why are there so many podiums?
So on this show, we have 30 lecterns across the floor.
Okay.
It is a very active voting meeting. And so they have to weigh in and vote from across the floor in different parts of the floor. So to distribute or receive, I should say, all those microphones, instead of running individual XLRs to all these different places, I broke it up in zones. And so I used Sound Tools, which is by Rat, Rat Sound Tools, Cat Snake, or Cat Snakes, multiple. And so I would do like 2 Cat Snakes in like each zone, and then kind of branch out from there. And then I had a Cat Rack at front of house receiving all of those Ethercons. And so it really, a lot of it was just kind of cutting down on cable and cable paths and just making it more efficient for load in, load out.
And how is your front of house mixer handling all of those inputs? Are they just leaving them open somehow? I mean, they can't see the people coming out.
It's all manual. I mean, there's a person on comm who's calling which lectern at which time, and
because they're calling them to speak next. To speak.
Yeah.
Okay.
There's a system in place to know who's going to come from where.
So it's not just going to be any microphone anywhere.
No, there's times where it can be a little chaotic, but there's at least someone attempting to call it. We have 12 robotic cameras hanging that they can kind of see all around the area. You can kind of see what's going on.
Okay.
And so we have a CL5 for the main desk, and then a QL5 as a sidecar, if you will. The QL5 just handles all the floor lecterns, so 1 through 30, all on the top layer there, and he can just on off which channel it pops up, and then he has the rest of his desk in front of him.
And does that come then as pre-mixed as a submix into the CL5?
Yes.
Okay, so let's talk about my event. I was down in Hall A. I learned a lot on this event. One thing you helped me with was Dante troubleshooting, which I don't have a lot of experience with. So I got into some trouble. I remember everything was working fine until I plugged in my ULXD mics, and then everything disappeared, and I was like, Chris, please come help. So what was the tip that you gave me?
Well, the first thing I asked you was, I said, what did you plug in that was different?
Yeah, what did you plug in last? And I was like, these mics, what?
No, yes, nowadays audio engineers also need to be IT nerds as well. Dante troubleshooting, my first go-to when I ever have issues with Dante is just to unplug secondary. It's very easy and common to cross your primary, secondary, or just it's a least common denominator. Let's cut out a possible area. And as soon as we pulled secondary, we realized that the issue resolved itself, which then led to realizing that I guess you had I think you had secondary and primary backwards on the ULXDs themselves, which was throwing things off. So
right. So when you run a star topology on the Dante network, then you can have redundant audio.
Yes.
So then you have, on the back of ULXD, for example, or all Dante equipment, right? There's a primary and a secondary.
Most, some stuff only has a primary, but most.
Okay. So then you can have redundant audio and a backup, and I guess that just automatically switches if something disappears. Right. So I had crossed those, and if you get those crossed, it gets confused, and not every device was then showing up in the Dante controller. Right, so we pulled the secondary connections, that fixed it, plugging them back in, broke it again, and then I realized that I had to change the ULXD configuration to redundant audio. It was on switch, and I had to change it to a different configuration.
Yeah, and in Dante, if you do switch, if you don't have a switch, then you can actually loop through. You come into primary, out of secondary, into the primary of the next unit, and continue on. But then you don't have any fallover if you do lose your primary line. So
after that, once I got everything configured, never had any more problems.
Yep.
So I don't know if it was switching back and forth between primary and secondary, but it worked the whole time.
It shouldn't switch unless you lose your primary.
Oh, I wanted to ask you about your observations of the way I work. You came down while I was doing part of the optimization. So my system was basically just 8 copies of the same array.
Yeah, it was in the round. Right.
Right.
So we
stage in the round. We had 8 arrays going all the way around it of some VRX 932 LA1. And I was going through a pretty simple process of just measuring vertical top, on axis, and vertical bottom of each array. But I did every array going all the way around. And the project manager kept asking me a couple of times, like, "Are you still doing that?" I'm like, "Yeah, I'm going to check every array."
He also asked me, he's like, all I've heard is paint noise all day. Does this guy know what he's doing?
So this was also a special show for me too because of the extra time that we had, right? Like I also had, I think, almost half a day to do all this stuff. If I didn't have half a day, it wouldn't have been hours of pink noise. It would have been measuring maybe like one array and the second one, and then maybe copy everything to the other sides and then just run around and listen real quick or something like that. But since I had time, I would measure every one. So back to my question, you had some questions for me and you probably had some observations. So what were some of the things you thought about the way I worked that we could talk about?
Yeah. So first observation was just obviously you're very methodical and what you're going to do. I had given you some paperwork on, at least my layout and design ahead of time. And then I noticed you made your own wiring diagram. And so to take the time to go do all that is was a good observation of, hey, this guy's A, taking it seriously, and B, just very methodical, making sure things are planned out well. So that was good.
Okay.
From the tuning side, so I asked you, you had your number 1 mic as your furthest away mic, and like number 3 or 4 was your closest. And I asked you why, and you said, number 1 being like the top of the array versus 4 being at the bottom of the array. Which I thought, okay, that makes sense. It's interesting. And then I tried to do that upstairs because I typically do it the other way, just from my first mic is down, the closest, and the other's back. And I learned that you probably shouldn't change your process if you've been doing it for a long time. Because as we're moving to each zone, I kept getting myself confused on which mic was going where. And
sure.
The theory makes sense, I guess, from a workflow if you're used to it. But I was used to it the other way. So not a right, wrong, or different, just workflow.
Sure.
And then, we discussed, so you were doing ground plane measurements because, similar situation of all concrete floor, and big metal ceiling and a big square room.
And at that time, there were no seats in my room.
Right. So I asked, hey, just out of curiosity, why are you doing ground plane versus, putting it at, say, ear height when... And so what was your response when I asked you that?
Right. So the simple answer that I have for that is that I feel like measuring at head height in a room like that is for like an advanced operator. And I still feel like I'm kind of a novice. When it comes to getting good data and just looking at the screen and knowing what to do, if I look at the screen and I don't know what to do, then something has to change.
Right.
I either need to change the way I'm getting the data, or I need to get someone else's opinion, or I need to think about it more, or whatever. So when I'm thinking about the most efficient, fastest way to get from like point A to point B, I'm thinking, you know what? I might start at head height, and then if there's like a lot of reflections and I'm getting really low coherence, and then I'm not getting data that I can take action on, then I'm going to move to ground plane. So then in most situations, especially like that, I'll just skip straight to ground plane because I know like I don't want to go through those steps of like trying to figure it out. And so yeah, that was my answer. Is that I was like, maybe when I'm a little bit more experienced, I'll switch to head height.
Yeah. So, and my take on that is, the floor is a factor for the hearing, for humans, and so I like measuring at head height, and I see where you're coming from on maybe a little harder to see through the trace and through the coherence and all that, and kind of weigh out what is or isn't the floor, and but upstairs when we tuned, we did it at head height. And it wasn't that bad in my opinion, but I guess I have been tuning for a little bit of a while. So
I should have done a comparison so I could show people.
Yeah,
like here's what the head height would have looked like. Here's what the ground. I didn't. I went straight to ground plane, and I think there's ways to get around that. So just to be clear, you and I both know that the best way to do it is at head height. Like that's how you should practice. That's the best way to do it because that's where people's heads are. And that will give you more realistic data, and you should practice that way. And I think what can also help, whether you're going to do ground plane or head height, but especially if you're doing head height, is doing more than one measurement, right? Yeah. Doing multiple measurements and start looking for those global trends instead of just like, here's this cone filter we found, let's EQ it.
So one of the first observations I had too is the way you're looking at your trace. You had your target trace of, hey, this is a corporate show. Here's my target trace what I'm going for. And you were lining that up with like the peaks across the trace as opposed to, I've kind of been taught and have always looked at the median of the trace itself.
Oh, okay.
So that was a different observation of, I'm used to trying to find, the middle through the trace,
So the middle would be like, maybe the middle, if you're looking at like the peaks and the valleys. So if you're thinking about the ripple,
right,
you could call it, you're looking through the middle of the ripple.
Right.
Okay.
Yeah. And so again, and what was your explanation on that though? That why you were going for the top of the trace as opposed to say the median of the trace?
Yeah, because the tops are the survivors.
Yeah.
Oftentimes, you'll see that if you take the coherence blanking slider and drag it all the way up, the pieces that are left at the top are the peaks.
Okay.
Visually, also, that's just easier for me. I'll try to line things up there. And so, like, especially when I'm getting set up and I'm setting my microphone preamps so that the trace kind of shows up where I want it to against the target trace, I'll make the peaks line up there. That's another one of those things where that would probably be hard for you to switch right now since you've been training to do in the middle.
Yeah. No, yeah. And another observation, I guess, because I work on the same speakers often, because I have inventory that I work with, I'm not a freelancer. I probably would have been, it's not a negative way, a little quicker and maybe a little bit more aggressive on some of the EQ.
Sure.
Just because, hey, I know I'm going to kind of scoop here, here, and here almost all the time because that's just what these boxes do, right? And also so used to only having such limited time, right? But we had the time to sit there and go, okay, let's try half octave. Let's try 2 dB down. No, let's try 3 dB. We had time to like A, B and do this thing. So again, it was an anomaly of the amount of time we had to work.
Yeah, that was pretty cool. We had some time to actually do some listening tests and see what does this filter sound like in and out. And that's also things that sometimes you can't do when you're alone as well. Mm-hmm. So like we found some places and we wanted to see like, does this have a significant effect if I stand here and if I stand here? So yeah, that's definitely a benefit of if you have more experience just measuring in general, but then even if you have more experience measuring a speaker in a room, you see that trace and you just know what to do. Mm-hmm. And yeah, so it was funny. I was saying things like, maybe we should put a filter here at 2K. And you're like, yeah, we always do that. Like, oh, okay, cool.
Yes.
That was a good contrast. And it also makes me think that depending on the amount of time, it would have been different too. Like if I was on my own and I'd never measured the box before and I never measured this room before, it would have been like, okay, that's good enough, probably, and we'll move on.
You and I went back and forth a little bit on it, was just, you don't always get to control where the subs are going to go. Right. And so when I designed it, we didn't know if the stage was going to be tall enough for the subs to go underneath, right? So it's a less than ideal of a scenario. Or, I might not be able to do end fire or center base subs. When I was in Miami, I happened to have almost 20 feet behind the stage. And so I could line up a whole end fire to center the room, be best case scenario. But then the next day, the stage is up against the wall, and you have nothing, and you can't put subs down in front because there's, DSMs. And so I have to do a split left right subs, even though it's not the best case scenario. It's what you have to work with. And so, you make your best out of each of those scenarios. And that's what you ended up doing, is that, I had four cornered the subs because it was in the round, and at least trying to disperse it some, even though knowing there's going to be cancellations. And you're like, well, hey, do I have free reign to do what I want here? Yeah, sure.
Yeah, I should say subs are a hot topic. Everybody it's like a trigger word for every sound engineer, and everyone kind of has their own preconceived ideas about where subs should go and how they sound best, and they've got that feel and that throw and that pump. There's all these words. The more I do shows with other people, I realize that it's really just different tools, right? And you get these different results. So I looked at your design and I was like, from what I know, working in rooms, this is actually going to be fine. But if I get the chance, if the stage is tall enough. So the funny part of the story is that I thought I wasn't going to have the chance because they said the stage is 18 inches. And I was like, okay, great. I'll just leave them where they are. It's fine. But then they installed the stage and I didn't notice. And I walked over and I was like, oh, they barely slide under there. So I had a little bit of time left one day. And I did have a little bit of help. But what we did was we pushed them underneath with our feet, and we put on some little pieces of cardboard so they would actually slide.
Nice.
And then crawled under there and got them into place and plugged them in. The second part of the story that's funny about all the work we went to build the TM array under the stage. So that was the thing. I wanted to build a TM array. It's the only thing I know of that is appropriate for
in the round.
Yeah. Straight out of the Bob McCarthy book. Working with Metallica. So the second part that's funny about this story is that then after I turned them on, I realized that there was enough power that I could do the whole show with one sub. So I said, this is silly. I'm trying to make this thing work that I've never used before. Let's go with a simpler solution. So I went back under there, unplugged 3 of them, pushed one into the center, and did the show with that. The challenge came then when the DJ came out, and I didn't have him there for a rehearsal, so the DJ had already started, and he was not super happy with it. And he was like, the low end doesn't give me that punch that I want. And so I knew several things in my head right away. He's used to working in smaller venues. He's obviously not used to doing DJ events like this in a giant concrete box, like smaller rooms, different systems, probably left, right subs, that kind of thing. At that moment, I wished we had a rehearsal moment where I could have done the EQ with him and been like, is this the sound you like? Is this the sound? I knew there were several things I didn't understand about what he wanted, and I knew that maybe I wouldn't be able to give it to him, but I still told him let me see if I can work on it. So I turned on another sub to see if more energy was enough, and that kind of made it worse. What I realized is that I think for this event, I probably should have had a second solution for the DJ to kind of make him happy, which would have been left, right subs out front, or maybe a line in front, but definitely where he could see it, because it was a problem for him that he couldn't see it. And it was also a problem for him that he didn't have direct sound. So although it was under him, and maybe that was the best spot for alignment for me, he would never hear any direct sound from the subs until it came out from under the stage back around to him somehow. So I feel like I kind of learned my lesson there, because it ended up working great for the rest of the show, but for the DJ event.
All around me are familiar faces, worn out places, worn out faces.
What's in your work bag? What do you take to gigs?
My backpack that I carry with me, I have, headphones, both IEMs and large cans, a DI, my Mac, Sharpies, of course, Q-Box. Nowadays, you have to carry a bag of dongles because Mac.
Sure. Okay.
So I have a bag of dongles, of course, bag of USB sticks. I love my GoPro. I love taking pics, with my GoPro. And then I have a Pelican that has the tools that everyone else has, but I carry a Shure 55 as my voice of God / talkback mic. Mostly to
I've seen that. That's cute.
mostly it's a staple of most of my pictures when I take my console pictures.
Okay.
But it's mostly just to amuse myself because why not?
Sure.
And other people get a kick out of it too. So.
So, Chris, looking back on your career so far, what is one of the best decisions you've made to get more of the work that you really love?
So two instances come to mind, both of which were at Maryland Sound. One was when I kind of first started. So as I started there, I was just kind of a grunt in the warehouse in Sweepland, as we called it, which is where we do all our test and tune and a sweep of the speakers and make sure all the drivers are working properly. We fix speakers, right? But I wanted to get out on shows. And so I remember a show was about to go out that weekend, and I want to get on it because I want to get on more shows. But prior to that, I hadn't really flown line arrays and stuff like that. So the other engineers weren't going to take me out because I wasn't as experienced. It's like, well, I have to get experience.
That's 22.
I have to get experience, right? So how am I going to do this? But I know how to patch a stage. I can run wires, all that stuff. So I volunteered. I'm like, hey, can I, I know you already have the positions filled, but can I come along this gig and be, alongside the stage jammer and helping the front of house engineer and loading in? And, I don't care if you pay me. I just want to come along. And so
Did you call him the stage jammer?
Stage jammer.
What's that?
Stage jammer is a term we had for the guy who's patching the stage, doing wedges. You're jamming the stage together. I don't know. It was just a.
That's cool.
I don't know if it was an MSI thing, East Coast thing, but yeah, stage jammer.
Okay.
So I did. It was I'll never forget the gig. It was Smokey Robinson and Gladys Knight.
Oh wow.
So first off, great artist, right? And I actually got a lot of flack from some of the guys there, like, oh, why are you working for free? Why are you doing this? This is stupid.
Sure.
They're just gonna take advantage of you. And I'm like, no, I want to learn how to do this. I want to be out here more. And I'll never forget our truck driver at the time. We had a full-time truck driver, and he's like, you guys are all laughing. He's like, yeah, one day you're all going to work for him. And it was kind of ironic because that wasn't necessarily the case at Maryland Sound, but where I am now. I mean, I have 6 audio techs that are full-time under me. I'm running an audio department of a decent sized corporate production company. And it was that type of mentality that I think of, just I'm gonna do whatever it takes to learn, because I want to do this.
Sure. So yeah, I think that's great, because your message here isn't necessarily, hey, go work for free, or hey, do this specific thing, but you were looking for a path to get to where you wanted, and you were testing things out.
Right.
We're trying things like, let me take this risk.
After I did that gig, and the front of house engineer and monitor engineer saw my work ethic and saw my drive and passion, they're like, I want him on every one of my shows.
Oh wow.
And so that was like a turning point of like, all right, I want this guy. You put yourself into those positions of learning under these people, and look, you'll get your time, you'll get your money. I'll tell people, like, no, I'm not saying go work for free, but there's been times where I've offered to do a gig or something of that nature for the experience. Yes, I'm going to make money to pay bills, but it's more about the getting the experience. And then the second time would be I had done a couple tours, but I was still pretty green. Hadn't done much monitors, but working under some monitor guys. And I was set to help set up for rehearsals for a tour for Savian Glover, which he's a tap dancer. Mm-hmm. And we were doing a tour called Classical Savian, where we had a small orchestra behind him and a jazz band. And he would first half of the show, he would do some classical pieces with them, and the second half would be more of a jazz improv and stuff, right? So I was just there to help set up the tour. And I walk in the first day. The monitor engineer wasn't there for the first day. That was from our company. And the sound designer was there. And I walk in. He's like, hi. He's like, after I'm setting up, and he's like, I was like, do you do monitors? And I had a split-second decision in my head to go, am I going to confidently say yes? Like, oh, I'm learning this. So I said yes. Yep. He's like, oh, well, you want to help me dial this in? And I'm like, yeah, sure, absolutely. and we got through some sound check and stuff like that. And he was like, well, it's like, do you want to do monitors on this tour? Because he didn't really care who the engineer was coming from, the company. I was like, well, I have to check on that. I wasn't the guy slated for it. So, give Bob a call at Maryland Sound and say, hey, this is what's going on. Can I do the tour? And he was like, well, you think you could do it? I was like, yeah. He was like, all right, don't screw it up.
Wow, so you just happened to be there.
Yeah, and it was one of those things of just, yes, I had the confidence to say yes, but then I had to back it up, of course. And,
sure. If you hadn't been able to do the job on the first day,
right,
you would have been out. They'd find someone else.
And it was a launching pad for, now after that, I continued to go out as monitor engineer as opposed to just like a stage jammer on tour. Okay. And so I looked, so those were 2 big times of just, right place, right time, but being intentional with it and stepping up to the challenge and pushing yourself.
Yeah, make it happen. Cool. So some quick questions here to wrap up. What is one book that's been immensely helpful to you?
So I'm not the biggest of readers. It's hard to say, but I would say as of recent, Bob McCarthy's book, of course. Okay. I mean, is there any other really?
There are a few.
Yes, but yeah.
What podcast do you listen to religiously?
So, yours, of course, Sound Design Live.
Oh, wow, cool.
I did not get paid to say that.
Okay.
But we're having dinner later, right? So,
well, sort of, yeah.
Trading dinner for, MixU, spelled MXU, but MixU is a podcast I stumbled onto recently, and I've been listening to. It kind of deals with the church world a lot, but, I mean, they have engineers like Scoville and other people on there that, whether you're in the church business or not, sound is still sound and mixing and stuff like that. And then Break It Down podcast by Matt Carter.
What's that?
He's a very analytical person who just breaks things down. So he's in a band called Emery, and he has some other podcast ventures. So he'll take say an album and like walk through like how they built the album and piece by piece. Or
it's like Song Exploder.
Yeah, but not just music. It's not just music related. So like, so he'll talk to somebody, say, about like a ketogenic diet, and like he'll talk to them and break it down of how and why and what they do in specific details. It's like the name, break it down. He'll talk to a psychologist and break down like what it is that they do and things of that nature. So it's just again, I think it goes back to that learning thing. I'm constantly pushing myself to learn new things and look at things in an alternative way.
What do you feel like is your next challenge? You're constantly pushing yourself to learn new things and see things in a different way. Is there like a skill that you really like to improve or a challenge that you feel like is in front of your face at this moment?
Yeah, so, I mean, moving forward, I mean, obviously, there's always things I can learn. So, I plan on trying to host, we've hosted 2 smart classes at IMS. I plan on hosting more in the future. For me, math doesn't come firsthand, right? So that's why, taking it over and over again, there are certain things that, I have to just repetitively think about and sink in, and so...
just give up and get it tattooed on your arm.
Yeah, so no, I think there's always areas with, just tuning practices, sound fundamentals of just aiming and box types and stuff like that you can learn. For me right now, it's more of learning how to teach better, right? So I'm responsible for training my staff, and I think I do a decent job, but of course you could always do better. So learning how to communicate, the IMS way, as we call it, like, hey, this is how we roll. This is why we do the things we do, and we concentrate heavily on educating our techs. So learning how to do that better is kind of my next, venture, and documenting it and making training materials for my guys. Oh, cool. That's both. It's cost effective too, and not having to pay for all the training, and it's very personal.
So Chris, tell us about the biggest or maybe the most painful mistake you've made on the job and how you recovered from it. Or maybe you didn't.
Yeah, no. So it was actually on my first tour.
Oh wow, which
So my first tour was Kem as R&B artist, and the opening act or middle opening act was Fantasia. She was an American Idol winner.
Okay.
I forget what season, maybe 2 or 3.
you were doing monitors for
So that one I was just kind of, again, stage jammer. First tour, so there was a front of house engineer, monitor engineer, and then me. So I was responsible for patching the stage each day, stuff like that. So Fantasia, it was her hometown in North Carolina, and I forget, Greensboro. It was Greensboro, North Carolina, and we're doing a theater. I hand her mic, and the crowd knows. Oh, so hometown and her birthday.
Okay.
She walks out.
Any words?
Yeah, she handed her mic. She walks out on the stage, and you can't see me right now, but I'm holding the microphone. My lips are moving, but nothing is coming out.
No sound. What?
And that moment, I'm like, oh shit, that's me.
What happened?
I forgot to turn the mic on.
Oh my god.
So I had to quickly run out there, turn the microphone on real quick. The whole crowd cheered, but it was obviously pretty embarrassing. And I have since never forgotten to turn a microphone on and power lock it.
Wow. So Chris, where is the best place for people to find you if they want to connect with you and keep up with what you're doing?
Yeah, LinkedIn right now for sure. I'm pretty active on LinkedIn. I hire freelancers all over the country for the work we do, so that's how I stay connected and find new freelancers. I post a lot of the work that I'm doing on there, and so that's probably the best from a professional standpoint.
Cool.
Also, you can also follow the work we do with IMS. So you can follow us, IMS Technology Services. You can follow us on Facebook and Instagram and LinkedIn as well. And that is a broader scope, maybe not just the shows I'm doing, but the shows that I design and I'm a part of.
Okay. Well, Chris, thanks so much for joining me on Sound Design Live.
Well, thanks for having me, and thanks for gigging with me as well.
We did it. Sound Design Live. Chris, is there anything I forgot to ask?
Yes, the most important question in audio.
Oh, wow. Okay, what?
What does XLR stand for?
Isn't it like something left, right?
No.
What?
You were wrong. It is Canon X Series latching rubber connector.
Thank you to Tears for Fears for all the music in today's episode. If you'd like to hear more of their music, you can go to the radio, I guess. I also want to thank DPA Microphones for loaning me the 4007 microphones that you heard Chris and I talking into. They sent me a review copy of those plus the 4090, so I'll be writing something about those pretty soon. Sound Design Live is supported by Dave, DC Sound Op, Senqui, Ellis, Megan, Joel, and Bob. You can start supporting Sound Design Live today for as little as $1 over at patreon.com/sounddesignlive.